I'm Bill Oughton of Oughton Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster. Hey, Chantal, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. I'm excited today because we're going to talk about a topic that I think about a lot and always seems to pop up when I'm handling claims and when I'm dealing with other people in claims, and that is confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And I've even written a blog post on that, so you can go to my website and look at that and
And what's
tell
that
me
blog
what you
site
think.
or what's that website email address?
The website is www.autin.claims. There's no .com, it just ends in .claims.
Would it be
Um,
slash blog or something?
slash
I'm asking you all the hard questions.
Yeah, slash ACM dash blog.
Okay, there you go.
But if you go to the main page, it's right at the top. It says ACM blog. You just click on that, it'll take you there.
Perfect.
And there's all kinds of topics in there. This one, again, it's one that always pops up. And when we're handling claims and we get a piece of the picture, we can often form an opinion about what the claim is about or what's happening with it only with a slice of information. And without the full information, we often get sidetracked or we walk down the wrong path. We try and deny a claim that should be settled, or we undervalue a claim or possibly overvalue a claim. And that's why it's important to have a peer review when you're handling claims. We can't operate in a vacuum. You have to get information from all of the stakeholders in your claim, including the policyholder, the claimant, possibly the agent, and any witnesses. So, and once you get that information, it's still important to have peers take a look at what you've gathered and the decisions that you've made on the claim to make sure that you are not becoming a victim of confirmation bias, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
And I tell you one thing, you've mentioned a very a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is peer reviews, or they're also known as roundtables,
mhm,
where the adjuster will bring the file into or the claim into a group of other adjusters or higher up in the food chain, and they all sit down and they discuss the file. Now, back in the day, of course, it was literally, it's called a round table because we were literally in the conference room at a round table,
mhm.
talking about it or whatever. Nowadays, it's probably via Zoom or team meetings or whatever. But the thing that I think is particularly important is even for the managers who are looking at this and the other people involved in the roundtable to be aware that they aren't familiar with the claim. And if the adjuster is presenting the claim for review, that bias may be coming through. And they may subconsciously, I'm not saying that they do this on purpose, but subconsciously not mention a fact that happens to change, something that would be relevant to a senior person, if that makes any sense. So as a manager, what I'm saying is that you need to be aware that your adjuster may be biased and in this roundtable, and you need to dig down a little bit deeper and ask some good questions.
Sure, that's the good job of the manager is to explore the possibility of confirmation bias in your adjusters. You also have to be aware of your own confirmation bias as well, though. And
Absolutely.
I mean, everybody needs to do this on a regular basis, whether you're talking about your relationships at home, your stuff at work, just in general. And it can sneak up on us.
Mm,
And one of the things we talk about a lot is water damage claims and the idea that um, a, when water gets into somebody's basement and the agent describes it as a flooded basement. And it's not really caused by a flood. It's caused maybe by accidental discharge, but they call it
Right.
flooded basement. So a newer adjuster may look at that and remember their training that flood is not covered under a homeowner's policy and instantly take a position in their brain, maybe not an official position with a letter, but in their brain, they're thinking that this is not a covered claim.
That's
And that radiates through their conversations with the policyholder and their interactions with them to where the policyholder may pick up on, hey, this person sounds like they don't want to pay my claim, and I've got a lot of damage here, and I want to know what's going on. So it's important to be open-minded when you're a claims adjuster, and to um, you got to get the facts,
mm,
and don't make a decision until those facts are all complete. Because if you jump too soon, you could make an error, and those errors can be costly, not just in terms of overpaying a claim, which can happen, but also in terms of the loss of respect of a customer or an agent or even your superior. When you
or
get things wrong, it's not a good thing, right?
right. Or goodness forbid, you end up with a bad faith, claim.
Right.
And those are expensive.
Yeah.
However, you're absolutely right. It's paying attention to some of the language, remembering the fact that, and we talk about this all the time, about how our insureds and maybe even the agents should know better, but even the agents will sometimes say, like you said, it's flooded. My basement's flooded, my kitchen is flooded, whatever. And you have to sit back and go, what kind of language are they using? Because they're not insurance people. The agent should know the difference, but I'm talking about like the agent or the insured, for example. So they wouldn't know that is a flood to them. The other thing to look at, of course, is the policy language and maybe because we're getting ready to hit winter, we're going to have a lot of frozen pipes, a lot of burst pipes. And in some policies, while the burst pipe isn't covered, there's ensuing loss. And if you stop right there at that, oh, burst pipe isn't covered. So none of this water is going to be covered. Well, ensuing damages may be covered. And that's the other thing that you need to be aware of. And when we're talking again about that roundtable, don't just simply say, oh, this is a burst pipe claim. Y-
And
You know,
it's very easy. The way a policy is structured, it gives coverage and then takes away coverage and then gives it back. And it does that thing.
yeah, yeah,
And if you don't read it all the way through, you're gonna be misled,
right.
but because you're not catching the fact that some of these sections of the policy reverse other sections, and that in itself is a cause for confirmation bias.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Um,
So one of the
we,
things I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about, so we refer to stakeholders as all the people involved in a specific claim. So
mhm,
you get your policyholder, your claimant, witnesses, maybe the agent, maybe an attorney. Barring the attorney, though, let's talk about those four and give some examples of confirmation bias that each of those people can become they can become victim to. And you as the adjuster need to be aware that if they have confirmation bias about something, chances are if you're only getting their version of events, you're also going to be uh, un unconsciously you're going to have that same confirmation bias because you're only getting one side of the story.
right.
So in the example of a policyholder with confirmation bias, and we'll talk about liability claims. Um, let's say your first call is to a policyholder who has a claim where somebody alleges that they slipped and fell in their driveway. So that person could say something along the lines of, I didn't know anything about this, and I didn't get a letter from an attorney for 6 months. So it's got to be fraud. Okay, maybe, right? Um, that's a it's a blanket statement that I hear a lot,
I do
and
too.
it's not based in any facts. The only fact that we know is that he got a letter that where someone is alleging something, and that's it.
Yeah.
Beyond that, that property owner, other than the information that they can provide us about that specific day, that date of loss, do you remember if you shoveled that day? Do you remember if you salted that day? All those things, they automatically dismiss any of those facts and they're just focused on this is fraud because of 6 months. Okay, 6 months does not make a fraud. That just means that they haven't got around to it. Maybe they were still treating that whole time. Who knows?
Mhm.
Maybe they hit their head and were in a coma for 6 months. We just don't
It
know.
can happen.
You
You
laugh,
watch,
you
you
laugh, but
watch,
it happens.
you watch a lot of soap operas. There are a lot of people in comas. Just
That's
gonna
right.
point that out.
Yeah, amnesia is really big.
It is. It is really big. It is a big problem.
Have you ever heard of an actual case of amnesia?
I have not.
Usually, when I see stories about it, it's like they're faking it. They're trying to,
Really, I have actually never had a claim with amnesia. I've had bad concussions. I've had traumatic brain injuries.
TBI. Yeah, I've never
Um,
had a claim with amnesia, but just
no,
in
I've never had a
stories I've
claim.
heard,
Yeah,
they've sounded fake anyway.
yeah.
Well, so that's an example of a policyholder that could be burdened by their own confirmation bias. Um, on the claimant side, you can have a case of confirmation bias as well. And what's an example? Hmm.
Well, using your slip and fall
Yeah,
example. It would be, I was walking down the sidewalk or whatever, and I slipped and fell in this area. Maybe it was after hours. The insured doesn't have lights up to illuminate the area so that I could have avoided this black ice kind of deal, or, I have no idea, something to that effect. So
yeah,
that,
those are actually points that arguments for negligence.
well, I know, but I mean, I guess that would be their confirmation bias that the insured is at fault because of they didn't do something.
Right.
Well,
And they're full 100% at fault,
they're
where
at
really
100% at fault.
it's probably shared.
The
And
the thing that I mostly hear about slip and falls from the claimant's point of view is I slipped and fell on your property, ergo, therefore, it is your fault.
right,
And, I talked about that in my book, Once Upon a Claim, is that no, just because you slipped and fell on a person's property does not mean that person is at fault. The landlord or the land or the renter, or the tenant is not at fault just because you slipped and fell. There's duties owed, blah blah blah, which I'm sure we're going to get into. Maybe not, because it's not the correct podcast for that. We're talking about confirmation bias, but what they feel, the claimant feels, is I slipped and fell, ergo, therefore you are at fault.
yeah. Along those lines, it happens a lot with trees and storms where a tree from one property falls on the other property. I've
Mhm.
I've had a case where the windstorm came through and blew shingles off of all the roofs in the neighborhood. And the shingles from building A hit the car of the property owner at property B, and property B was pointing their fingers at they're your shingles. You've got to fix my car. Well, that's not exactly how that works.
Yeah.
So that's another good example of confirmation bias. Another one has to do with food poisoning.
Yes. Speaking of, hold on just a second. I do want to point out, plug our next show.
Yeah.
Our upcoming show will be with Marty Shaw, where we're going to be talking about trees
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything.
That'll be a good
So,
one.
just in time for winter again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, food poisoning also, yeah, very, very good. Although I wonder if there's some strict liability there.
Well, the confirmation bias I'm thinking of is when someone eats a meal somewhere and they really
Mm,
didn't like it.
mm,
They just didn't like it, and then 2 days later, they come down with some illness,
yeah, yeah.
and they say, "Well, it had to be that because I hated that meal." Well, it could have been anything. After a
Food
few
poisoning
days,
hits
did you
you.
wash your hands after every meal? Did you? What else did you eat between then and then? So,
Food poisoning will hit you much sooner. than 48 hours
Yeah. So,
as well. So,
so I think it would that is an actual claim situation that I've run into multiple times in my career is where someone they honestly they didn't like the food or they didn't like the service,
mhm.
and then they got sick a few days later and they just blamed it on that food. Well, really, there's no way to
Yeah.
prove unless you can get the food sample and have it tested somewhere.
And there are people
Um,
who keep that. They keep a little
yeah,
bitty bite.
yeah. We keep evidence samples of food, believe
Yeah.
it or not.
Ew.
So,
What
anyway,
about
so
agent?
that's how a claimant could examples of how a claimant could have confirmation bias. Now, how about a witness?
Mhm.
So the way when I see confirmation bias in witnesses, what I tend to see is they usually know something about that person.
Mm.
If they're drunk, I always see them come out of the bar. It's no wonder they fell. Okay. Maybe they fell because of some actual defect on the property, but this person knows their background and has this belief that that person engages in other activities that would have contributed. And maybe it did, possibly, but just because they say that and that's their opinion doesn't necessarily mean it has anything to do with the claim. You, as the adjuster, have to investigate that and find out if they were really
Yeah.
engaging in that kind of activity or not.
And I would say that just because it's a witness doesn't mean that that's an unbiased witness
Right.
as well. And of course, we
Right.
are talking about, you know, confirmation bias and that sort of thing naturally, but it could be the husband, it could be the best friend, and so you have to take that with a grain of salt.
We had a claim with a guy who was broken up with his girlfriend.
Mm,
She made a claim that she had fallen somewhere. He called in to say, "Hey, I can tell you what really happened. I know the whole story, and she's lying, and here's how I know it, and I will give you a statement." Well, come to find out, what had happened was they got into a fight. So
mhm,
he decided he was going to tank her case.
mhm. Listen,
So
I have had that happen on a lot of occasions, and adjusters, I would tell you when you all of a sudden get a new witness or someone wanting to recant their statement, you do have to look at that and wonder what has changed. Why were you lying now or were you lying then kind of deal.
right,
Which,
right.
which one is it? Do I go ahead and then just throw the entire statement out? Both? Because I do not know which one to trust at that point.
Yeah, you have to have a healthy distrust of pretty much everybody you talk to. It doesn't mean that you are completely cynical, but um, you have to be cognizant of the fact that people will maybe lie to you or
Mm-hmm.
embellish or something, and explore what kind of biases they may have. Maybe they're prejudiced toward a certain type of person.
Right.
Maybe they had a claim against them in the past. Maybe they were a claimant in the past. Those things that, if someone had a bad injury and had a jury award of a million bucks, let's say, that person is going to make a different kind of a witness than someone who had a claim against them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have a different opinion about what may have happened. And they may be a little more or less sympathetic toward the person who got hurt. So you may get a skewed story. So let's talk about agents. Do you think they have any confirmation bias?
I do. I do. And I think where it comes in is the fact that they
They have skin in the game,
they
don't
do.
they?
And the word I'm trying to look for is that like their bonus sometimes is set up on their loss run history.
Right,
And if they have a claim, that cost a lot of money, that might impact their end of the year bonus.
right.
I was talking to an agent who has taken over a book of business, and he has a lot of angry insureds now because when the insureds were, originally calling in and turning in claims, this previous agent would say, that's not covered or that's beneath your deductible, don't turn it in, blah, 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 so that he could have a really good loss history. Whereas this agent is actually doing what his duty is that as soon as you know that there is a claim, you, as the representative of the insurance carrier, has to turn it in, you know?
Yeah, I've had
So,
claim, or I've not had claims, but I've talked to people who had asked me about a claim, just a friend. I had this situation. I called my agent and they told me it wasn't covered. I said, well, what was the situation? What they described was absolutely a covered claim.
mhm,
And I said, did they send you a letter? No, they just told me it wasn't covered. They
uh-huh,
didn't send you a disclaimer letter? Well, then maybe you should call back your agent and explain to them that you would like to speak to somebody at the insurance company. And a
right,
lot of people don't understand the difference between their agent and the insurance company either.
mhm.
So yeah, that can be a dicey situation, and shame on agents who do things like that. That's not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it, but what the agents need to also understand is that unless they have an adjuster license and are able to follow the Unfair Trade Practices Act, then they do not need to be calling or making those coverage opinions. That is what an adjuster does.
Right.
They should also be aware of, again, as a representative of the carrier, as soon as the agent has notice, the carrier has notice. And that starts the clock ticking for the carrier to investigate this claim. Now, the reason why this is important, and I know we're talking about confirmation bias. But again, the reason why that is important is that if we don't investigate that claim timely, we are opening ourselves up to a bad faith claim. And guess
Not
who?
only that, but in New York, you are opening yourself up to paying a claim that might not be covered. And
Exactly.
that's the what some attorneys refer to as draconian laws here in New York that
Well,
require that a disclaimer be issued
yes.
very quickly after we find out what happened.
Right.
And
And so guess whose E&O claim is going, or guess whose E&O insurance is going to get hit. So while you think, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, that you're getting something on the back end, I mean, that E&O claim may end up costing you a lot more than what your bonus is, and you may end up, losing the ability to write for this particular carrier.
yep, yep,
That's your
serious
bias.
stuff.
I mean, this is what happens when you have a bias. It can be some serious stuff.
Yep. It's hard to detach yourself from biases
It
too.
is. You have to
Uh,
recognize that you have it first. And I
yeah,
think that is the hardest thing. I mean, what do they say? Remove the timber from your eye before the splinter from someone else. And I mean, you don't even see that you necessarily have a bias. You've got to try to look at everything from every side of the story or, every point of view.
yep. So we started talking about peer reviews and roundtables, and now we should talk a little bit about how groupthink can also
We haven't
create
talked about
confirmation
attorneys.
bias. Oh,
Attorneys have biases as well.
oh, no, no doubt.
Yeah, we
I
haven't.
talk to attorneys all the time, and they're only getting, of course, they're only getting their client's version of events. And
I am
it
going to say that this is no fault of their own because we won't let them speak to our insureds either.
Sure,
I mean,
sure. So when you're having those discussions, you have to, as the adjuster, you got to remember that they probably don't have access to the information you do. So you need to give that to them so that they understand the full scope of the story. But
exactly,
that
because
goes
we're going to
both
get it in the
ways.
lawsuit.
Yeah, that goes both ways. The
Yes,
attorney will often say, "Well, it's we know it's your insured's fault. It's 100% their fault." And all the information we have suggests otherwise.
right,
But they're not, the attorney's not yet giving us the information that they have
right.
that cements this 100% liability opinion in their brain. And without it, we can't really help them, right?
Mm.
So, attorneys out there, if you've got all the information, share it with us for crying out loud.
We're going to get it in a lawsuit. I
Well,
mean,
I mean, there are a lot of attorneys that will just
yes,
that they'll just go to the lawsuit to begin
I,
with, which
I
I
totally
don't
get that.
really understand.
I don't either. Look, I know that we won't let you talk to our insured. I get that. I understand it. Um, but you, it's your job to prove your claim.
Right,
It's not our job to let you talk to our insured. So,
right,
if you don't let us talk to your customer, your client, then we have to go off of what our insured and any other witnesses that we can find says. And if our insured is saying it's totally fraudulent, they've had it out for us for years, we threw them out one time, and so this is a retribution kind of thing. I don't know whatever they're saying. And you don't let us talk to them, then yeah, we're gonna send that disclaimer letter. You will file suit, and then we get it anyway because we get to take the deposition. But in the meantime, everybody spent $50,000.
right.
Um, and maybe you get defense cost out of it. Maybe you don't. I don't know. But I mean, either way, you're wasting time. So I get the fact that you're angry and this is your, like this is your bias. Defense counsel also has a bias. Don't get me wrong. Um, but yes, we all get it in the end.
Mhm.
Because I mean, that's what discovery is all about. We're all supposed to be putting our cards out on the table, sharing information, so that we try to resolve this before we end up at the,
That
courtroom.
that's the goal. That's the
Yeah.
goal. And so you can see where confirmation bias between the parties that are adversarial to each other is always going to cloud the water a little bit. So clarity and shining light on some of the facts for everybody involved is the best way to overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were saying groupthink. Groupthink.
Groupthink, yeah. So
Yeah.
imagine a culture within a claims department where you've got a group of, say, 6 or 8 people, and you roundtable a certain type of claim. Let's say this group handles, we keep going to slip and fall. So let's say they're a slip and fall group, and that's pretty much all they handle. And they have a series of claims that all settle within a certain dollar amount,
Mhm.
and they're all similar circumstances. And then they get this one where there's something different about it, but they keep putting it in the same bucket as these other, 10, 15, 30 claims that they've evaluated prior to this. And but this one's a little different. Maybe this is a person who has a really high income and missed a lot of work. Or maybe it's a high profile person or
Or an eggshell
uh,
claimant.
an eggshell claimant, right? Where their recovery is going to be very, very long and
Or they got
arduous.
amnesia.
They got amnesia. Yeah. I we had talked about that, didn't we? I can't remember.
I can't remember either, but I feel like it would be really important because a lot of people get amnesia in soap operas.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they do in insurance claims too, believe me. Um, so but my point is that as supervisors or even as a team member, it's important to try and avoid those biases as you go through your reviews of your claims and make sure that you're not lumping one claim into a group of other claims that might be a little bit similar because you could be evaluating something at $50,000 where it's really, $500,000 claim. That would come up and surprise everybody. And your group isn't going to look good to the superiors that you all report to. So
Yeah, and how would you recommend that we avoid this kind of group think?
I would say try and be aware of trends that you see and question those trends to make sure that they're trending the same way because they are actually the same kind of case. And that I had a series of claims that were all very similar and they all settled within like $10,000 of each other. And and then we had another one come down the pike that settled for $700,000, you know.
Wow.
Uh, so those types of things happen a lot. And there's also always the outlier,
Mm,
the claim that looks and smells like every other claim, but
hmm
then it goes to a jury and something happens, you know, whether the jury's nuts or the claimant's attorney just does a really good job, or maybe the defense attorney really, you know, does a bad job, and you wind up with a verdict that's just, you know, totally unexpected.
Right.
Um, I think we can all tell stories about when that's happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens because of confirmation bias, because you didn't expect it, because you didn't see the factors that made that claim more valuable than it actually was. And sometimes we get overly cautious too, and we see a claim where a certain thing happened, and we say, "Well, that's a really serious one. We better reserve that at $1 million."
Mhm.
And then nothing ever comes of it.
Right.
You know,
Well, I mean,
those
it
happen too.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna make the suggestion that if you have a team like that, like a large loss team or whatever, and they're always kind of they're insulated and they always talk to themselves, perhaps for your reviews, you get a new person in like at every roundtable, like someone new who isn't part of that group, because that person would bring in a different experience, and that person isn't part of your groupthink culture. So,
absolutely.
so for
I think
example,
the large, especially in liability, a
yes,
large loss team shouldn't exist. I think what happens there is that that large loss team, everything becomes a large loss once they get it, right?
yeah,
Why would you do that to yourself? Um, I think I've seen that things are handled much better when you've got someone who is capable of handling multi-million-dollar claims, who
hmm
also handles the small ones,
hmm
to give them, you know, broad perspective. Because otherwise, everything in the world is going to look like $1 million claim.
right.
So you don't want that.
No, 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 no. But uh, no, I agree with you. But I think, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a liability person. I mean, heck, you can even bring in, if we're talking about liability claims, you can bring in a property damage person. Yeah, they're not familiar with your policy. Maybe they don't know how liability works. This would be good. This is actually advantageous because they're going to be asking a lot of different kind of questions to figure out what in the world is going on. And that might simulate a jury environment where a jury would be like, no, I think that this is really important, or I don't think that's important at all. I don't care what you think. I mean, I get the fact that you think that this is important, but I don't. I don't understand why it's important. Why do you keep coming back to this point? If I'm understanding the scenario correctly, this has nothing to do with that.
Mhm.
So that might be a great way to combat this idea. And you know what I was thinking about too, is that we really haven't talked about what confirmation bias is, have we? I mean, I think we assume that everybody knows what it is, like, but I don't,
Well,
if we defined it,
sure.
uh,
Um,
halfway into the topic.
yeah.
Let's
Well,
just define it.
at the outset, I kind of attempted to, and I
Yeah,
maybe
I think we
didn't do a
did.
great job at it. So,
Well, I mean, I don't want the definition, but I was just saying,
well, I think it's a textbook definition here might be worthwhile. So, Wikipedia says
okay,
confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values.
yes. So I think it's very important, given that, is that for people to automatically assume, okay, so if this is what I think, what is another way to think about that? I'll give you an example. Sometimes I get not in trouble, but a lot of people assume that I feel a certain way because I'm sending out an email that doesn't have the warm fuzzies at the beginning. I'll start off going like, what do you think about this? Da, 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 da. Instead of going, good morning, I hope you are doing well, and blah, blah, blah. And so they make assume that I am cold or whatever. It's not that. I'm just rude. So
Yeah,
I wasn't
a little
raised right.
explanation is all you need.
I wasn't raised right. No, that's not right. I just happen to be busy, or it doesn't occur to me because I'm concentrating on this one thing, and I don't mean any offense by it or what have you. I'm thinking about this one particular thing, and I want to get it. I want to shoot off that email or whatever. So because I know that it has hit people wrong before, I make sure that I put a greeting in there in the beginning. So I don't know if that really is a good example, but
I think it is. I had this habit of doing one word text messages,
yes. Oh
responses.
gosh, I
Yes,
yeah. The
no.
the, the okay, I hate
Okay.
that. My husband will, and I used to get really upset about it until I realized that it was on the Apple Watch. And he would read
Uh,
the email on the Apple Watch, and it'll either say yes or no, or can I call you back, or it'll say okay, and he'll just hit okay, and I'm like, oh, okay. See, that was my confirmation bias. Like I was thinking he was blowing me off. I was getting
right.
really upset about it until I noticed something else. That
A lot of apps and even LinkedIn, I think, has this feature where it will give you canned responses that
yes.
are a little more human than just a one word answer. And
Mhm.
sometimes they have emojis in them, and they do a pretty good job, I would say. I don't use them very often because I think when you recognize that it's a canned response from one of those apps, that it's the same thing as just saying yes or no, or
Right. Exactly.
one word answer.
Right. Like you're not important enough for me to actually type
I don't
something.
have time to really respond to you right now. So
Speaking of social media and social apps and that sort of thing, that is a great idea of social think or group think is because if you realize in certain areas you are only getting your friends' ideas, you very rarely get the other people's ideas. Um,
yeah, social media is
the,
set up on
the
these
algorithm,
algorithms that just feed you what you want to see.
the
And
algorithm
so
does
you very rarely see anything that confirms the other point of view or
exactly,
presents the other point of view in a way that is digestible to you.
absolutely.
The only way you see the other point of view is as an adversarial kind of topic,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be pretty dangerous too. So, you
Absolutely,
know,
because then you're insulated. Then
yeah,
you're insulated.
yeah. So it's not a good idea to unfollow people you disagree with. I think that's a bad habit people get into. You should probably listen to them, even if you think they're wrong, um, just so that you get multiple viewpoints of a particular topic.
Absolutely.
But, but yeah,
Um,
groupthink. So, and the same thing can happen in a claim review process where if, now one thing that can happen that can really stifle things is that when someone has an opinion about something and six of the eight people around all feel one way, but you feel
mhm,
differently, it
mhm.
can be difficult to stand up and say, excuse me, but here's what I think, and here's
Yes.
why. Because you're going to have six people looking at you like you're a Martian, and who wants that?
Yeah. And I, again, would recommend that you go ahead and you voice that opinion. There was a movie, and I want to call it maybe World War Z or something like that. I don't really remember, but I remember this conversation that they had. It was where zombies were taking over the world, and Israel had built a wall around the entire country, basically, and didn't have any zombies in the world. And one of the Americans were like, how did you know that this was going to be happening? And the scene said with the Israelite, he said, okay, so there's 13 of us on the like parliamentary thing, and when World War II happened, we didn't think Nazism was going to be bad. And then when something happened, we didn't think that was going to be bad. We all agreed it wasn't going to be as bad as we thought it was going to be. And then when something happened, we all agreed it wasn't going to be bad, blah, blah, blah. So now we've made this, this parliamentary thing, and it is one person's job to disagree with everybody else's groupthink kind of deal. And if
Hmm.
that one person disagrees, we are to follow that one person. And that person was me. I thought, yep, this is a zombie apocalypse. We need to build a wall. We need to gather up all our crap. We need to leave the sandbox, blah, blah, blah. And that's how he protected all of Israel. Okay, so you could be that one person, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
To
I
stop the
have been
group.
that one person,
Yeah.
and I can remember feeling embarrassed. I spoke
Mhm.
up and I said, "Look, I think this is what is really going on, and here's why I think that." And
Mhm.
I get a lot of burnt brow, and
Yeah.
I get um, admonishments, and just sit down, Bill. But later people came up to me and said, I was thinking the same thing, Bill, but didn't want to say
It didn't want to
it.
say it. Didn't want to say
So
it. Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
stand your ground, people.
Exactly. It's okay. And if they think you're an idiot, maybe not. They may think you're an idiot at that time, but you will be proven right.
And maybe you'll be wrong.
And maybe
There's
you'll
a
be
chance.
wrong.
Maybe you got it wrong, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean
Exactly.
that
I will say,
somebody's going to stand up and get fired and call me and say, "Bill, I did what you said."
and let me tell you this, guys. I think that adjusters are frightened of making mistakes.
Yeah.
You can, because they're afraid that a lawsuit is going to come out of it, or a bad faith claim is going to come out of it, or blah blah blah. And if that happens, it happens. And I've seen it happen because, of course, I'm an expert witness. But I've written in my report, hey, you know what? This is a mistake. Absolutely. You know what? You caught us. We didn't send out this letter or
Mhm.
something that we were supposed to be doing or whatever. And but this is the only mistake I found in the file. And humans are humans, and we're allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah, bad decisions can come from bad
But
information.
that doesn't mean that we committed bad faith,
Right.
you know. So anyway, what else? We are running out of time.
Yeah.
What
Well,
else?
I would say wherever you are in life, wherever you work, in your family, personal, or work life, try and maintain an open mind and be aware that confirmation bias is this little monster that sneaks up on us all at night when we're not looking, and it could guide your opinions and your decision making, and sometimes it can get you into trouble. So be careful out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So great episode. Um,
Yeah,
next or 2 weeks, we are going to have Marty Shaw on, and we're going to be talking about trees, which I
yeah,
think is going to be great
yeah.
because we're getting ready to hit winter. And so we'll have all of the winter stuff going on with slip and falls, trip and falls, ice dams, tree limbs falling everywhere.
We noticed that while we were gone the past few days, we came home to find a lot of the outdoor furniture had been rearranged by the heavy winds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely. All right. Well, you have a wonderful day,
you
and
too.
we will talk shortly. Bye.
Great. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.autin.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.